Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. Tim Myers does a bit of everything. He's a writer, songwriter, storyteller, visual artist, and senior lecturer at Santa Clara University, where he teaches writing. We got together to talk about the nature of creativity, which Tim calls a sacred mystery, including everything from the way our childhood creativity is changed by the culture as we become adults, the necessary role of play in the creative process, the transcendent experiences of awe and wonder and how they fuel us, the wisdom of following your gut, and a whole lot more. The subject matter may be deep, but the conversation is lighthearted. I think you'll get a lot out of my conversation with Tim Myers. Tim, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
Nancy, I am so delighted to be here and so grateful that you allowed me to be part of this whole thing. I think it's wonderful what you're doing with this. I think creativity is I think there's even greater awareness that it's becoming more and more important in the modern world for lots of different reasons. So I think that the fact that you're doing this is really out there contributing in a major way. Plus, I just think this is going to be a blast.
Me too. So I start everybody off with the same question, which is,
sure.
Were you a creative kid or did you discover your creative side later on?
I absolutely was not a creative kid. I was a kid who was, it's funny because people sometimes stereotype kids, like people talk about children's imagination. They all have great imagination. Well, if you teach kids, they have the same human schmear as adults do. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a much greater open-mindedness and open-heartedness to it. So I think one reason adults often say this is because they miss that in themselves and they feel it's underdeveloped in themselves or repressed. And when you see kids playing, they are so open, so into flow. They're like instantly into play flow. And they can be very creative in the way they play, although kids also play traditional games all the time. So I was a kid in that same sense. I can remember things we did and talked about and things I wondered about. I can remember, again, I'm saying this is kind of like minor creativity that could happen to any kid. I can remember being really bored during class when I was in 3rd and 4th grade. And the nun's up there talking, and I had this thing I would do in my head where I'd imagine firing a slingshot and it ricocheting off the room and hitting the statue of the saint and shattering I was such a little heathen. There probably were signs in me at that time, but what did happen to me though, and there actually was a starting point for me, so in a way I answered incorrectly. So I was in 6th grade, and Sister Mary Boniface, I went to a Catholic school, as you can probably tell. Mm-hmm. Sister Mary Boniface was our teacher, very tall, very slender, slight German accent, Boniface, and her mouth was a line. She never smiled. And so, of course, as kids, we just always assumed she was mean. Actually, looking back, I realized she was a very shy woman, right? So she called me in after class one day. For some reason, she'd asked us to write an essay or something. I'm 11. For school. And then for some reason, I wrote a poem. Now, it was about St. Stephen the Martyr, the guy who got shot with all the arrows. So, and I was actually a pretty cheerful person, but I don't know why I did this, Nancy, and I turned it in. And then the day after, at recess time, I heard the words that every kid dreaded, which was, "All right, boys and girls, it's time to go to recess. Tim, will you please come and talk to me?" And I was just scared to death. And I'm standing there, little kid, and she's sitting at her desk, and she said, "You know that poem you turned in?" And I'm just like, "Oh my God, did not follow directions. And she said, I still remember this. I kind of get the chills. She said, "I liked it. You could have knocked me over with a feather." I graduated high school in 1971. I was born in 1953. I'm not saying all parents were like this, but parents talking to kids, adults actually talking to kids, that was not a common thing then. Parents and teachers talked at kids. Mm-hmm. So she was actually talking to me, and she liked something I did, and I had no idea why I'd done it. She encouraged me, so I started writing more poems. She put them in a little booklet. I just got a huge kick out of that. So I've often thought I never thanked her. I was too young to understand. But she set that free. She opened that gate for me. And then I kept on from there. So I guess it is true that it happened when I was a kid, but even then I was very, very gradual and very slow to get into it over time. I was not like my wife was one of those kids. When she was a little kid, she was awake and aware and watching what was going on, and I was more like an apple on a tree, just like slowly ripening. And that's, yeah. And then it picked up speed and intensity over time. How about you? Were you a creative kid, or were you a later?
I'm not sure if anybody's turned this question on me before. So
It's such an interesting
it is,
question,
it's a
isn't it?
great question. Yeah, that's why I use it. But
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, I was writing stuff. The first thing I remember writing was a story when I was in fourth grade, when my brother got the chicken pox, and I wrote a story about it.
Okay, so that's young.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And then, little things here and there. And I think I was about probably 4 or 5 when my parents put me in my first children's choir, which is something that I've
Oh,
never stopped doing. So
oh, how
so
wonderful.
yeah. So that has always been a thread, though not for the last couple of years for various reasons. But one day I shall go back. But
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yeah, I mean, and that's been was a huge part of, I mean, that's choir is literally how I picked my undergrad college. So you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I used to tell the kids when I was teaching, I was like, don't ask me how I picked my school. And especially if I tell you how I picked my school, don't go tell the college guidance people how that I told you how I picked my school, because it's not how you're supposed to do it.
But I mean, but this is wonderful though too, because I was going to say, obviously, the way creativity arises in us has a lot to do with nature, but it also has a lot to do with nurture. And people in your life, and obviously it could be parents and it could be teachers. Surprisingly often it is not. And again, not I'm not out here to judge all parents and all teachers. I was a teacher educator for almost 20 years. This is one of the things my wife is a PhD educator, and I learned 80% of what I know from her. And we would always emphasize in working with our teacher candidates how much they need to put creativity into the curriculum. And we had to emphasize this because that is not the default position
Isn't it
for most
amazing?
teachers. It's like, are you guys not reading the papers? Are you not seeing how these creativity gurus are making buku bucks by going? It's like, this is something we should start preschool, obviously. But how wonderful that your parents would have you in a choir at age 5. Why is a 5-year-old not in a choir singing?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Well, and I think my dad started singing in choirs when he was that little.
Okay.
So,
Well, there you go.
you know,
The torch
but
is passed on. Yeah.
but yeah, and I think they did the same thing with my brother, though that one didn't take. But
Right. It doesn't always
but
take.
but he's the one who can pick up any instrument and just start playing it, and we just sit there going, "That's disgusting." Would you stop?
So maybe it took a little.
It took in a different direction. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you what happened to me. As I told you before in emails, I'm really, really interested in songwriting. Well, in fact, I'm interested. I've been doing it for decades, and I've probably written over 1,000 songs, and I'm working on a musical right now. And it's interesting that your point about your brother. My mom. It's funny because this fits with my earlier story, which happened when I was in 6th grade, and in 7th grade, my mom. By the way, I'm the oldest of 11 kids. My mom was overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And when I think back to this, I am so grateful to her because I mean, just keeping the house from exploding was a major accomplishment, not to mention putting food on the table. She bought an old piano, an upright wooden piano, $75. I remember this. And she encouraged me to take piano lessons. So I'm a 12-year-old boy. So I'm like, well, I don't know about this. And I took the lessons, and this very sweet, kind of vacuous older lady who had doilies on her tables. And I started, with the da, 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 da. The lessons lasted. I took about 5 of them, 5 weeks. And what I realized early on, talk about pedagogy and how you should teach. If I didn't practice, I got a B. If I did practice, I got an A. So that was a pretty easy decision. So I stopped taking the lessons, but I had learned the structure of the 3-note chord, the 1-3-5. And that's when I started songwriting. So, like your brother, it's this whole thing about creativity is at its heart, such a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
At its core, in my opinion, in my feeling, at its core, it is a sacred mystery.
Oh, yeah.
It is a divine gift, in my opinion. But it's also very weird, like a lot of divine things are. So that you never know what's going to spark what. So if, again, parents, teachers, expose kids to these experiences early and not just, hey, give me the name of 3 classical composers. Put instruments in their hands, put paintbrushes in their hands, take them outside where they can pile rocks together. There's so many ways you can do this. You never know what's gonna spark. Does your brother play regularly?
He doesn't as much now that he's got kids.
Right.
And they're 8 and 11, and they both play. They both take piano lessons. So
Excellent.
I think maybe that helped him kind of get back into it. And for a while, I don't think he had a piano, but he used to, like, the whole time that he was in high school and college, like, I would come home. He's younger than I am, and I would come home like on, fall break or something. He would spend hours in the basement at the piano. And just as one example, he literally destroyed my copy of the vocal selections from Phantom of the Opera because he played it so much that the pages fell out.
Okay.
But he wouldn't just play it. He also listened to the CD constantly. So he'd figured out all the stuff that went in between. And he would sit down there and play for an hour or two and just play the whole thing straight through just for fun. He also played trumpet, and now he plays guitar and harmonica. Like I said, he picks up stuff and just goes with it.
Well, but he's clearly, so this is another thing about this mystery of creativity. It's not only the mystery to me that these things exist in the natural world, either as actual manifestations like bird song or the sound of waves coming on the shore. I mean, rhythms obviously exist in nature constantly. Tones, not quite so much, but they're there too. But what the hell happened in this simian brain of ours that causes us to flip out in reaction to these things? Now, your brother needs to keep doing music. He needs to. I mean, when that level, he was on fire, and that fire is not gone. Yeah, and again, I laugh because a huge part of my artistic life has been dictated by the fact that we had kids. That makes a huge difference. But when I think of that fervor, and when I think of how utterly anti-practical it is, I mean, it's like he's spending hours in the basement playing this music over that he loves, accomplishing what? Well, for God's sakes, accomplishing everything as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, wow. And we had lots of conversations because I was very anti my parents' anti-music degree idea with it, because I was like, hi, what's he doing all day?
Right. Right. Yeah,
and he is an architect, and he's very happy being an architect. And so, he's got plenty of places to put his creative energy. But I just kept thinking, because my parents were very much of you don't do that as a profession, you do it as an avocation. And in a way I get it, because if you turn what you love into a profession and it doesn't go quite the right way, it ends up owning you instead of you owning it in ugly ways.
Well put.
And you can end up hating the thing that you loved, and nobody wants that. But, at the same time, I was like, double major, come on, let him
exactly
do, but yeah, no, he's picked up the piano again, and he's definitely, lost some in the intervening years, but he still picks up and plays.
He'll get them.
And what is amazing is to watch him with my nephews, who are still learning this stuff. And it's kind of that, what was it you said? Sacred
mystery?
Sacred mystery. That's it. So it's exactly that, because he just is so tuned into that stuff that there was a moment when, he was talking to the boys, and he was like, well, you just pick this up and do it. And my sister-in-law and I immediately like, no, you just pick it up and do it. It doesn't work that way for them.
That's right.
And I know the same thing happens with me. I mean, I can't necessarily break down for you, like how I wrote a really good paragraph or something like that. I can tell you how to fix your bad paragraph, but I can't necessarily tell you what magic happened that I just know how to do it. And that I think is part of that sacred mystery. It's like I don't know, it
Absolutely.
just happens. So yeah, and I get why people struggle with things like that. I also get why it's hard for us to forget with the stuff that comes so naturally to us that,
Right.
yeah, we learned it once upon a time, but it just clicked more easily in our heads and we didn't have to work at it as easily or something. And so you got to remember not everybody else had that happen with that thing. They probably have their own thing where they can do that, but it's
Right.
not
Right.
necessarily your thing. So maybe go easy on people.
That's right.
It's hard to
No,
remember.
and this is a good example to me too of this wider, not just importance but crucial importance of creativity. There is a tendency to kind of ghettoize creativity with artists. I don't mean ghettoize in necessarily a bad sense, because a lot of people really admire that. But what gets lost in that is the tremendous foundational amount of creativity that happens in the lives of all human beings, whether it's fully accepted or not. I mean, it's kind of there, it's there in potential. So these questions about education and creativity always come up. And I think they should come up because it's not just about, I mean, it's sure it's obvious as hell, but I'm all for more school funding for the arts. I know you're more than familiar with all those arguments and how it does pay off. And there's all kinds of research now. But also as an educational principle across the board, having nothing to do with the arts. One of the best principles is, and again, having taught teachers for so long and having been a teacher so long myself, I tend to think in these pedagogical ways, right? I will often say this to my writing students as well as to my teacher candidates that I had back then. If you had a basketball coach and he or she sat you down and said, okay, let's talk about physics. Let's talk about the laws of physics. The basketball is a sphere. It's moving in space. The curving movement is covered by calculus, or you would go, coach, this is all well and good, but what are you talking about? Well, of course, the coach is exactly right in that every second of playing basketball is physics.
Yep.
But that coach would be, and of course, no coach would ever do this, is 100% wrong in terms of how to do basketball because it's experiential physics.
Yeah.
So the more we put students into doing situations, the better they get at artistic things and at non-artistic things. And part of that is a solution for those of us who teach creative writing or other forms of the arts, is that we don't have to, because I'm totally with you, Nancy. I'm like, I can do so much for you as your creative writing teacher, but I can't teach you how to do creative writing. What I can teach you is how to approach it, some possibilities here, how to set up the circumstances in your own head. I can show you models. I can talk to you about how I did it. But even then, I mean, again, this all comes back to the sacred mystery. Why did I use that word? Well, I can tell you, I thought that word was great because it was a contrast with the previous. But how did I come up with that? I was watching a Sting video sometime back. He and another guy, I forget this other guy's name, he's been with Sting for years, a wonderful guitarist. And the interviewer was asking them about, how do you write the song and how'd you write this song and everything. The phrase that kept coming, because they never, I've watched a lot of these videos, they can never answer the question directly because there is no answer. And what they tend to say is, and Sting, who's, by the way, very articulate, he kept saying, well, I was messing around with this. Oh, yeah, well, we were messing around that day. Well, I was with Richard in the studio and we were messing around with this chord. And I'm like, messing around is as good as we can do. And the answer is exactly yes. It is as good as we can do. It's a form of play. Right. So the more we involve play in not only human recreation, but the more we involve play in actual normal practical skills, not to mention artistic skills, not to mention thinking, learning to be a better thinker, critical, the more people are allowed to play and encouraged to play with that, the better they get and the richer life is for everybody. And of course, like you said, it doesn't always work. When you mess around, 9 out of 10 times you get crap. But the 10th time?
Right. And you're reminding me of the example. I read Keith Johnstone's book Impro back almost a year ago. It's like the Bible of improv, basically. And it's
okay.
It's not even that new. I think it came out in the 70s, maybe even a little bit earlier than that. But there's one example that he gives in there where, somebody did a study with a group of, I think they were bankers or something like that,
Mm,
something that you don't think of as being much more than bean counting, and had them do an exercise as themselves and rated what they came up with. And I think it was some kind of idea generation kind of thing. And then told them that they were going to role play being hippies and, flower children and whatever, and do the same exercise. And when they were allowed to free up that way,
wow.
the results improved dramatically, both in quantity and
Wow.
quality. And I think that's the same kind of thing. It's like you're allowed suddenly to stop being the straight laced, I am very
Yeah.
serious and I'm going to
Yeah.
count all of the beans, and just have fun like you did when you were a kid. When you were saying earlier, people look at creative kids kind of like, I miss that. And I think you're right. I think
Yeah.
we think we're not allowed to do that anymore. And culturally, we have not caught up with the idea that, yeah, actually playing and having fun is really good for you and it makes everything work better. But it
Exactly right.
does.
And being behind the curve culturally is this big critical part of this. One of the things that also drives me nuts about this is a lot of these aspects of play are dismissed automatically because they're associated with childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know the degree to which they are gendered. I mean, that might be worth thinking about some more, but it seems to me that domestic world, what I'm thinking about is that elementary school world, which traditionally has been children and women. That's changed some, but it still tends to be there are more women teachers there. That world where play is not only accepted, but centered. Of course, not everybody in that world centers it, and some teachers don't get it and everything. But that whole thing is in direct contrast to the super important money dealing male bankers.
Yep.
You know, so again, there's this sense that this is serious and this is play. So there's a great book by Dutch, I think he's a Dutch philosopher. Huygens is his name. It's called Homo Ludens. It's a super scholarly book. In fact, if you read it, you got to be ready for it. Just the full on, and it's an older book, right? It's just so scholarly, footnotes and everything, philosophy and everything. But his basic point, which he says in this most classic hierarchical language, is play permeates culture. Culture itself, he identifies with play. And when you think of that, you're like, well, yeah, what's the difference between chimpanzees and Homo sapiens? Well, we play more. We go beyond the norm. I mean, chimps even do that a little. Right? It seems to be an evolutionary capacity. But our whole thing is like, why would you wear a red shirt when you could wear a gray shirt? Well, that's play. There's
Right.
something there that is, it doesn't have I mean, if you're a firefighter, maybe it has a practical benefit, but for most of it doesn't have a practical benefit. Why do we love music so much? Why do we love the arts? We could feed ourselves without great tastes and amazing recipes and all that. So this idea of play is still not having caught up and still being, you're not serious. I just bankers and hippies. I mean, that's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, and there's so much research coming out that confirms all of this, and it's like, you kind of want to take out the billboard in Times Square and be like, look,
Exactly.
please, can we do something with this?
We're not just a bunch of dumbasses over here. We're not just like hippy dippies. We're talking about stuff that is now science is backing it up.
Yeah, but it's also, I mean, we all thought that the way that work worked was going to change with the pandemic, and an awful lot of people are trying to put that genie back in the bottle. So that seems to be a cultural characteristic too. Like, we know better, but no, we want it to stay the way it was because we know how that works.
Well,
So
but that's the thing about genies. As the stories tell you, when genies get out of bottles, they don't always get put back in. And even when you get it back in, sometimes there's a little blue smoke floating around. We'll see.
Yeah.
So I've got to ask you.
Uh-huh.
I think I can't remember if I asked you this in email, and forgive me if I did, but how did you get interested in creativity to this level?
I think what really did it is when I was teaching, and I taught for 8 years in a private school. The first 2 years I taught tech classes because my first jobs were in tech support.
Yeah.
And then I switched over because I said, I have this English degree. I'd kind of like to use it. I switched over to teaching English as a second language. And
Yeah.
when that happened, then, I kind of became more of a full-fledged a real live teacher. And they
Right.
gave me advisories and stuff like that. And I became the advisor of the literary magazine. And this was also
Oh,
around the
cool.
same time that I started writing again myself after not doing it for several years. So I was playing around with all of these things, and I wanted my kids to play around with all of them. And
Yeah.
also I had this lit mag I had to fill.
Right.
And where was I getting submissions? There was no creative writing course at the school.
No.
The closest
Are
thing,
we talking about high school?
high school, middle school.
Okay.
Yeah. So the closest thing was that the ninth graders would always write a short story after they did their short story unit. And when I started my MFA, I realized I actually kind of started laughing. No offense to anyone that I taught with, because I get why you do it this way. But they would go through all of the traditional elements of the story, the setting and the theme and all of that kind of stuff. And that was what the kids were armed with to write a short story. And I'm sitting there going, that's not what you need to know to write a short story.
The physics of basketball.
Yeah.
It's the physics of basketball again.
Exactly it. Because what I was doing in my MFA was the, complete different planet from all of that. But, part of what I was encountering too was that people were convinced that ESL kids couldn't do creative writing. And I was like, what do you, why do you think that? Do you think that they're like subhuman somehow? I mean,
do they not speak their first language?
Right. They're kids and they have words and they have imaginations. And so it may not be perfect grammar, but so what?
Oh, so maybe that was their problem, is they thought it didn't make sense because the language difficulties. But I'm like, no, the motivational force alone is going to help them.
Right. And so I started doing creative writing units in my longer ESL classes because I'm also that kind of person who would look at people like that and go, oh, really? Let me prove you wrong.
Yeah,
let me show you how wrong you are. And so like probably, I don't know, 70% of the lit mag would end up being stuff that my kids had written in my class.
Oh, that is so wonderful.
Because that was what I was mostly getting, because nobody would help me. I kept saying, how am I supposed to do this when they've got no feeder to give us stuff? And from there, I decided to go get my MFA because I had felt like I had done what I could do with my writing on my own. And also I was hoping that it would give me the street cred that somebody would finally let me teach a creative writing class.
Right.
Didn't
absolutely
quite work out that way because there was this whole recession just as I finished my MFA and stuff like that. But yeah, that was really what did it. It kind of somewhere in there, a switch got flipped. I mean, and I think the switch had always been at least partially flipped, but it really, was just cranked after that. And then shortly after that, I discovered that creativity coaching existed and was like, there's my people, Yeah. But yeah, and when I had ESL kids doing creative writing, it was so cool to see the things that they had written. Like the kids who spoke Chinese were so influenced by Chinese poetry that they would write things that you could tell, even if you hadn't read a whole lot of Chinese poetry, just like the way that they used images and things like that. You're like, that is really cool. And also you see this, you people who say they can't do creative writing, like come read this and then talk to me.
Exactly.
And also, I mean, I had one kid who wrote this multi-part story. I don't even want to call it a short story because I don't think it was all that short. And it was kind of, you could see the influence of like manga and video games and stuff like that.
Right.
So what? And there were these moments, and this wasn't the only one. It's just the one that I remember. But he had a character who, two characters are fighting and the one knocks the other one out. And the way he wrote it was that the character fell down and lost his mind. And it was one of these moments where I just looked at him and I said, so here's the thing. As your teacher, doing my due diligence, I have to tell you that the expression you want is that, he was knocked out, he lost consciousness, anything like that. But I also have to tell you, and I have to tell you that losing your mind means you've gone crazy in English. But I also have to tell you that I really kind of like that.
Exactly.
Exactly. I get it. And I like the way that works there, even though any other person picking this up is going to be like, what? But this was like, he's using words in a way that makes sense.
That's right. That's right.
There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I hated having to correct it.
Well, but
But,
I mean, that's, to me, this, first of all, it's really wonderful that experience would start you. Again, you were already on that path, but that would really send you hurtling down that path. But I love your point about lost his mind. And to me, there's a word for this, and the word is poetry. Poets are the ones who are, insane about language. We're the ones who are like, oh my God, that word sounds so weird there. Does it fit? And like to shoehorn something, an expression in where it does belong. Now, I think you were absolutely right to tell him that, not only as a ZSL teacher, but again, there's an audience problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
But the potential, what I love is that you immediately went, oh, there is some rich language potential here that could, like, where could that lead? And again, look what we're back to. We're back to this core of the sacred mystery. Why does that particular idiom in English have these overtones that suggest something else? And again, the first thing I feel, which I'm sure you felt the same way, is like, oh, let's play with this. Let's see is there a way you could do it where somebody knocks, every time he hits somebody, they actually lose their mind? Could there be a wizard who can put us, you know what I mean? And you just roll this thing and see where it goes. And of course, the kid didn't know what he was saying, but because you set up that context, like we were saying earlier, where it's valued and encouraged, then he starts discovering things. And then, how many times, well, I don't know if you play, but I cannot tell you how many times I have written a song based on a finger mistake where I'm playing a chord and I hit the wrong chord. And the essence of creativity there is actually having your damn ears open. Yeah. Right? Because it's like, oh, wait, I'm trying to play that. And what'll happen again, 99 times out of 100, it's like, oh, no, sorry, you missed the chord. Here, do this. Then the 100th time, it's like, oh, wow. Do that again. How does that sound? So again, we're talking about that whole thing of, in a way, maybe there are three elements to this. I'm just off the top of my head. That context, which values this play. Mm-hmm. And then in that context, there's the doing of it. And then the third part is paying attention. One of the most, people talk about that now as a very important spiritual practice, actually paying attention. I love that you loved that phrase in that context, because again, this is what poets are like, Nancy. They poets are like people who can smell a color at 100 paces, if you know what I mean.
Yes. Well, and that's why I remember it.
Right. And it's still in your head.
It was so vivid, and I just sat there looking at it, going, he's not actually wrong. Literally, his character has lost his mind.
Lost it. It's just temporary. And he temporarily lost. See, there's got to be a way to use that. I have a big file for this novel I want to do, which right now is called Fantasy Novel with Magic. And that's the kind of thing that I when I hear about that, something like that, I'll think, could there be a way that one of the magic users in this thing was able to create a temporary, again, I'm just riffing with it. But yeah.
No, and I think that's absolutely right. There's so much stuff that is happening around us all the time that we're not necessarily tuned into or noticing, that weird little dissonance or the turn of phrase that you're like, that's not what I meant to say. And yet.
I like the and yet.
Yeah, like there's something about that. There's something, this is not the color I meant to mix, but this is the color I seem to have. So what am I going to do with that?
Yeah, that's nice. I like that.
Yeah,
well, in a way, this partially contradicts what we both agreed to earlier. About teaching creativity or teaching creative writing, just to give a specific example. Again, I will always say, I could teach you A, B, C, and D. I can teach you the alphabet. I can't teach you how to put the letters together. I can teach you words, but I can't teach you lines, that kind of thing. But one thing we can teach them through practice is paying attention. And when you think of it, at the heart, and not just as part of creativity, but at the solid bedrock core of it is radical paying attention. That's
Yeah.
a good phrase. A radical level of paying attention,
Hmm.
which you do. And again, it's easy to see too how this melds or shifts into the spiritual. You want to pay attention with your whole self, body, mind, heart, and spirit. It's not just, I mean, I don't do that all the time. I mean, I don't want to be unrealistic about it. And this can get also really new agey and hippy dippy, and people can take this way too far. But you think like, so if you, because I do visual art, so color is a huge thing for me, and I'm looking at color all the time, like when I'm out riding my bike. Well, sometimes I'll just look at it and go, wow, that's a cool color. I don't know if you've ever seen, I don't know if you all have crepe myrtle trees there. Anyway,
I'm not sure.
there's a particular brick red kind of scarlet hue of crepe myrtle trees that just drives me crazy. That's actually a good example of what I'm saying, because I could just go, wow, I like that shade of green. When I start thinking of that crepe myrtle, it's like, well, wait a minute, that is drawing me. That feels more about the nature of the world. That feels more about I'm a human body with eyes in this world in which another being is sending a color to me. There's almost I don't want to call it sexual, but there's like an attraction there.
Hmm.
So again, at that point, and especially if I go touch it, or I'm standing closer to it, or if I smell it, I mean, again, radical level of paying attention. And I think one of the things that does happen with that is, in fact, my word for that is beholding,
Hmm.
as opposed to just looking.
Sure.
I think I think that probably, I hesitate to say this because again, like you said, people who are to whom this is natural, it just kind of happens for us, right? It just
Hmm.
does. But I feel like when people behold in that deeper sense, creativity is almost inevitable. It's almost like it inevitably is going to restructure your neurons in some way. Now, whether that's going to lead to art or whatever is a whole other question. But I think, for example, that for most parents, when their child is born, they behold the child.
Hmm.
They don't just see it. I mean, this is, for God's sake, what are we at? 7 billion now? How many billion people lived in the past? This is a very common occurrence. This is a very common being here in front of you. And yet, for most parents, you see with a capital S. You don't just see. And what's funny is when you think of parents, what that usually leads to is not just that one moment, but a lifetime of giving, which is analogous, at least in some way, to creativity. It's like you're going to do everything you can to make the life right for that person, or make life right for that person. Huh.
Yeah.
I love your story. I just love that.
Yeah. Well, and you're
ESL
talking
kids.
about awe and transcendence and all of this too,
Absolutely.
which
Absolutely.
there've been a bunch of books in the last couple of years about awe. And I read one of them this year because I just think it's such a fascinating thing. And
I
it's
just bought my wife one. Which book did you read?
the,
I haven't read it yet.
Dr. Keltner's book,
Is
which
it
is
called
called
Awe?
Awe. Yeah.
That's the one. That's the one. I'm going to be reading it. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, and he breaks it down into, I don't know, 5 or 6 different categories, I think, and talks a lot about everyday awe, which I thought was really interesting because I don't tend to think of it as an everyday thing. But the more you go looking for the everyday awe, the better your life gets.
Absolutely right.
You know,
Absolutely right. And again, this is one of those practices that can so easily be turned into, like, I don't know, weekend symposium at the local motel or whatever, which isn't necessarily bad either. I don't mean to say that everybody who's doing that is a huckster. But that that sense of wonder, it's really hitting me right now too, because like now is particularly bad. The news is really, really bad at the moment.
yes, we're
Uh,
recording this just after Hamas attacked Israel, just a couple days later. So yeah.
and we've got the war in Ukraine and the
Hmm.
continual crisis of the climate, all of these things. And still people getting over the pandemic and all kinds of effects of that and all this stuff. Um, I often, like anybody who's paying attention, and I don't pay attention all the time because I can't, it'll just drive me into the ground.
Right.
But you have this feeling, you get up and you're looking in the mirror in the morning and you're like, I want to help, but I'm just one tiny little cog. I feel powerless. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Waging peace means, I always say this to my students, we're just us little people here in this room, but waging peace means two things. Not the absence of war. The time between World War I and World War II was not peace. That was halftime. That was, they were building, it was all coming back, right? Waging peace is not an absence of war. Waging peace is two things. It's building up individuals and building communities. And obviously that can take practical forms, but to go back to our point about play, the seeking of wonder and awe is an act of play. It doesn't put food on the table. It doesn't create products coming out of the factory, right? It's not life insurance, although I suppose in some ways it really is health wise.
Yeah.
So the idea that we can actually find wonder in daily life. I love this Zen story, and I was actually just thinking about it, so I have to put it in here because it's about enlightenment, but it can also be about transcendence, and it can also be just about wonder. So the abbot is sitting with all the young monks in the hall doing zazen, and he notices one of the young monks is missing. So they're all meditating, and suddenly the missing young monk comes screeching in, and just without a word, he doesn't bow. He runs straight to the front, and he spits on the statue of Buddha. And all the other young monks just jump up and grab him, and they're about to beat the hell out of him. And the abbot raises his hand and says, "Wait, why did you spit on the statue of Buddha?" And the young monk says, "Show me somewhere to spit that is not Buddha."
Ooh.
What is the world that we live in? I mean, for God's sakes, I'm in this ordinary world too. I got bills to pay. I got rent. I wake up with a sore back. I'm having trouble with that student. I argue with my wife about something. She's always right, so those usually end up pretty clearly. And yet, where did the greatest mystics have their mystical experiences? Right damn here.
Yeah.
Where that moment you have when you see some incredibly beautiful thing in nature, like remember the first time we drove into Yosemite Valley? We got out of the car. My wife and I, our daughter was like 12 or whatever. We got out of the car. My daughter's actually super sensitive. My wife and I were sitting there with tears running down our cheeks, and my daughter's like, "What is it? What is it?" Well, okay, but that's also, that world is right here.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't mean there's no ordinary in the sense of our regular experience. Of course we experience that. And of course it's like, oh God, I got a stomach ache, or I drank too much, or whatever. But this is the same place where all these other pinnacle moments of human experience have happened. So I love the fact that you're saying that was something. And again, I think more people are starting to cue into this. Is like, you find it in everyday life.
Yeah. Well, and while you were talking, it occurred to me that, when there is so much awfulness in the world, finding moments of awe and wonder is not just an act of play, it's an act of resistance.
That's exactly right. Beautifully said. And it's funny because I thought you were going to say it's an act of self-care, but you took it even further. But no, you took it even further. It is an act of resistance. And again, I'm not kidding myself. It's not going to save anybody in Ukraine. It's not going to save a Palestinian. It's not going to save an Israeli. But it is part of the accumulation of good that we're trying to constantly add to. It is an act of resistance. And of course, hope is an act of resistance. So it's very much aligned to hope. It certainly works that way for me.
Well, and all of this is how you change the culture, ultimately. You get enough people to commit the little acts of resistance and acts of play and whatever. And eventually it will reach its tipping point and take hold.
That's right. And it's funny to think of this too. I say funny, meaning like funny, odd, that paying attention, I'm just repeating a point I said earlier, paying attention is a form of creativity. Mm-hmm. It's not the full-on thing. There's not a product, but there's an inner change or an inner product of that. And it actually takes doing like creativity does. It actually takes that, stopping, disconnecting from all the things that are distracting you and whatever, making you tired, and opening up to something big, which is exactly what we see kids do when they play.
Right.
See kids come out of school at recess and they're tired and their heads are swimming or whatever, or they're just tired of the whole thing. And a kid will go, "Tag, you're it." Everything opens.
Yeah.
The whole body, the whole mind, and boom, off they go.
Yep.
Well, I think we've solved the problems of the world. I think we should send this to Biden and have him send it out. We got a method
Yeah.
here.
Send it to him, send it to, I don't know, the Pope, the Dalai Lama,
Yeah.
you know, but yeah, I mean, I can only hope that eventually we get to a point where people start to clue in and figure out that it really is that simple, even
Yeah.
if it's only in your personal world. Because if you let yourself be so downtrodden by everything that's in the news, that's not good for you either. So
No.
you need that balance. You need a way to stay in touch with the transcendent and the wonder in light of all of that.
Well, and this is another reason I have for affirmation or optimism, whatever you want to call it. I mean, to me, it seems like I'm saying this all the time. I believe in progress, but I believe progress overall is 3 steps forward and 2 steps back.
Mm.
That still leaves room for progress, but I mean, I'm realistic about how this thing happens all the time. But it's encouraging as hell to me to think that it's precisely these terribly difficult circumstances that help us hone our sense of why this is important. And I'm not saying it isn't important all the time, because it is, but we've been, I mean, domestically, politically, we've been in a contentious state for years now, right? And then we have these problems going on in the world, and then these greater problems that are affecting all of humanity, nuclear war and climate. Um, it's the old darkness light thing, right? You just know the light more by the darkness that you feel. And it's encouraging to think, I mean, I actually think you're right. Here, you and I are having this conversation. When I was younger, I don't remember people talking about creativity.
Nope.
I mean, maybe I'm sure there were some out there. I'm sure there were some psychologists who were looking at it. But from what I read, this better than I do, that wasn't even a big thing on the radar of most psychologists back in the day. So we're talking about something that's really powerful and really new. And the fact that it's making any inroads at all shows you that there's a great need. Another thing I think that's hilarious about humans and creativity, particularly when you look at adults and play, is that adults actually cannot live without some play. So even in the most hidebound traditions, even in the most dismissive of play, we're serious adults and everything, we have all these forms of play.
Mm-hmm.
Sports is a huge one.
Yep.
And being a sports fan is a huge one. It's almost, I often think of sports fans as kind of like art fans, like the sport is like an art and they follow it like an art. Um, uh, this gets into all kinds of other questions about legality and health and all the rest of it, but substances that alter the mind have long been substitutes for, I'm not saying they're always unhealthy. I like to drink. I have no problem with that. But they are very dangerous, obviously, and they can easily be abused and they lead to addiction. They're a sometimes unhealthy substitute for these other healthier forms of play and creativity that I think a lot of adults would do, would feel much better about themselves, like you said, if they were involved in it. So it's like we always make room for it somehow. But
Yeah.
what you tend to do is starve ourselves. It's like, well,
Right.
you can play a little bit. You can play, you're a man, you're a hetero male, you can play in this way. And of course, a lot of that gets pushed to drinking. Like if you get super drunk and you scream at the football players that you follow, it's like, oh, that's okay, play. I'm like, well, okay, let's expand our definition here. But it's not going away, right?
Right.
It's not going away.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Adult forms of play tend to be, what's the word I want? Contained, I guess.
Yes.
We have to put a safe container around them. Because I think we are, when we look back at kids and how freely they let their imagination run, I think we're jealous and I think we're scared at the same time. And so
I think that's absolutely right.
We put these boundaries on them so that we feel safer, but that also means that we never really get back to the thing that we're jealous of.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that idea of jealousy is a really good point. In fact, I love contained. And it also struck me that we have a tendency for adult play to see it as psychobiological release and relief. So it's about drinking or drugs. It's about sex. It's about the kind of public emotion that you can express, like when you're screaming for a team. And then you see, for example, I often think of Prince's song, Dance Music, Sex, Romance. You see there's a huge amount of the play impulse in young adults more than maybe older adults, but that goes into music concerts, like Coachella. My students, I teach we have like a what do you call that? We call it CTW, critical thinking writing. It's like freshman comp. That's what it is. So I have a music theme for mine. So my students are often writing about their experiences. I can afford to go to these things. They go to Electric Daisy Festival, or they go to Coachella, or it's in Glastonbury or whatever. And a number of them have written they've been very moved by the crowd all being gripped by this rhythm, all in sync. They often talk about making friends. And, again, there's a shallow side to this and a temperate side to it. And what's interesting is they often do not mention any use of substances to accompany all this. And sometimes a few of them will mention that. I think it's both a good and a dangerous thing, that these things become very much rituals of release and play, and it's around art. And a lot of those festivals too, there's art all over the site, and it's this whole alternative thing, like Burning Man. And Burning Man's got its bullshit and its positive side, right? So of course there are going to be a bunch of rich yuppies and tech people from the Bay Area where I live going there, and I'm not against all them. I don't mean that, but again, it just shows how primal this need for play is.
Yeah.
Which again gives me hope in the long run. I mean, it's because it's one of those things. It's like, I don't worry about humans starving to death unless they run out of food. People aren't going to stop eating just because they're not interested. They're interested, and they'll eat crap. They'll eat crap, but even that's better than not eating. At least it'll keep them alive. So this, and I mean, look at the food movement now. People are actually going, oh wait, maybe we can eat healthier food. Maybe these processed foods aren't so great for us. Maybe we can. I'm thinking that the same thing is happening with play, because it's a need that's just as deep, and that the more expansive or uncontained, to use your word, flipping it around, that people get, the more that they will understand this to their own benefit.
Well, and I'm wondering, because I know that you talk a lot about following your gut, and I'm kind of wondering, is that I want to talk about following your gut all on its own, but I'm wondering if there's just like that gut instinct is finally reasserting itself after so long and saying, hey, you know what? I'm tired of being all buttoned up. This is okay for certain occasions, but it's not a way of life. And, I'm done with that way of life.
I love your balance there too. The one way to avoid this, excess to the left, to the just, whatever feels good, whatever. One way to do that is to talk about this very normal, mature balance between the things we do where we exercise restraint and the things we do where we let ourselves go. And I don't mean let ourselves go sometimes has a negative connotation, and that's part of the problem, right? I think you're so right. I mean, I think I'm going to generalize at a huge level here, right?
Okay.
That's always dangerous though, because there can be a million exceptions. But it seems to me that democracies themselves, which are far from perfect, at least they prioritize freedom. Now, again, I believe in this freedom that's mixed with responsibility. I mean, like you heard when you're in high school from every teacher, right? But I think one of the things about freedom is it just tends to get closer to what human beings really are. So right now, we have a lot of people who are saying, all this racism, all this homophobia, all this sexism, no. I want to be who I am. I deserve that freedom, and you shouldn't be treating me in ways that curtail that freedom. And it's not good for you. So I put this in that category. Geez, when I was in high school and a young adult, therapy was a horrible thing. It's like, oh, you're loony bin. There's been this huge movement to destigmatize mental illness. And we have a stronger understanding, a lot of people anyway, that there are different levels of it, that we all go through things, that going to a therapist is not bad or weak. I feel like it's part of this whole movement to be that freedom begins, which allows the fullness of humanity to actually be expressed and valued, not just to be expressed, but to be valued. And I think play it's funny because you talk to almost anybody today and they'll say, oh yeah, racism is bad. Oh yeah, we have to work on the climate. Oh yeah, look at the imperialism. Look at Russian imperialism. Play's on the same list, but it doesn't make the list. It's not in the mainstream mind in that same sense. So maybe it's a harder thing to sell. Or maybe it's just it's going to happen downstream from these far more pressing. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand in the world right now, and my choice was I could stop all racism or I could make people play in a healthy way. Well, of course I'd stop racism first. It's triage. The damage is still being done and all the historical damage is there. So maybe it's one of those things that just happens in a natural order, which is maybe even better.
Well, it also makes me wonder if we played more, would we be less racist?
I think that is absolutely true. Yeah. I don't think that's a wild claim. I think people, I mean, what creates racism? Well-adjusted people? No, not at all.
Yeah.
That's something.
Yeah. So like I said, I do want to make sure that we talk about following your gut, because I think it's an important concept. And I would love to hear how you've done it, how you include it in your teaching, wherever you would like to go with that makes the most sense to you.
Just because I love that you brought up this whole question of wonder and transcendence. I didn't grow up that way. I mean, I grew up in a very Catholic world that was pretty much, my parents are super Catholic. My uncle, who kind of lived with our family, was a priest. Ironically, my dad was much more of a stickler for Catholicism than my uncle, the priest, who was also a writer. But a lot of that religion was taught by rote in those days. And there are still plenty of places in the world where religion is taught by rote. To me, it hardly is worthy of the name religion. And this is one of the reasons why we're having this huge semantic split between religion on one hand and spirituality on the other. I think the semantic split doesn't make sense ultimately, but I totally understand why it's happening. So I approve of it, like my approval means anything. But my point is that there's a spiritual component to this gut thing that just thrills me. I think a lot of what we're talking about, obviously you and I have emphasized play, and the other side of that, which has come up naturally with play, is imagination. And the role of imagination in terms of its cultural understanding, acceptance, and the way people look at it, it's really kind of similar. There's a tendency to dismiss imagination as the property only of the artistic or the creative people over here. By the way, the tech world has kind of opened that up a little bit, because inventors have always been people of imagination. But digital tech has had so much influence on people that people are more like, oh, she came up with this great idea. Now there's a startup. And, again, I live right here in the middle of Silicon Valley. The way imagination is thought of generally, though, still tends to be, it doesn't get knowledge, information gets the prime role in our society generally by default, which is not the way it should be prioritized. But of course, I believe in information. Knowledge comes next. Wisdom comes next, and some people don't even believe in wisdom. And then imagination is like, is it even in the race? Is it
the redheaded stepchild?
Yeah. And you know what they do to redheaded stepchildren? They beat them. That horrible saying. Oh my God. But so my point is that this gut thing is. I actually don't like that phrase. Go with your gut. I don't have any problem with the idea of going with the center of the body. I don't have any problem with it being physical. It's just that the imagination, again, has this ultimately mysterious source epistemologically. And now I could go off on a whole long thing of this, and I won't, I promise you. But one of my big points is that we have been in intense epistemological crisis in the Western world since the Enlightenment. So for 300 years, we've been running this experiment based on the idea that to know something, you have to know it with either the certainty of logic and a reason, which is a little more diffuse, or with a certainty of science. This is such an incredibly Procrustean, truncated, reduced view of the world, which has also, by the way, brought tremendous amounts of knowledge and wisdom into life. I'm not anti-science, I'm pro-science. What I'm against is scientism, which is when you take the rest of the world and you say, well, science teaches me that your love for your wife doesn't exist, it's just molecules. And I'm like, okay. So this gut thing, it is odd to think that we constantly use it. Our assessment of daily situations, of people we meet. What's the temperature of this conversation I'm entering right now? Can I ask her for this at this moment, or would it be better to wait? I wonder what he thinks of me. Imagination, for example, is the glue that holds society together, because the better we can imagine what another person's life is like, the more we can, And then it has this role in spirituality, and when I say spirituality, I mean to actual theology and in art. The problem is, well, I love to think of some kind of dialogue, right? So it's somebody like Descartes or somebody who's saying, well, it's uncertain, it's not predictable, it's not consistent, and people come up with all kinds of crazy BS based on it. And I'm like, you are exactly right, but that's the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is funny is some people will just, and again, not everybody's still a materialist. They're nihilist, materialist, relativist. Whatever. They'll say, the imagination. Oh, you think you can come up with the truth because you've imagined it? Well, that's ridiculous. I'm like, well, okay. Do you feel the same way about love? Epistemologically, love is not science. You don't fall in love with somebody by saying, oh, here are the 15 points I like about him, and here are my predictions based on formulae of what our life. You have a feeling. Now, that doesn't mean if you banish reason from falling in love, you're in trouble. People get themselves screwed over big time that way all the time. So we want the balance. But at the heart of love, my wife and I will often say, it's funny. We not only like each other, we love each other. Or sometimes we say it the other way. We not only love each other, we like each other. Yeats has this great line where he said, I got to look this up again because I'm forever quoting it and I'm not getting exactly right. He says, a man doesn't fall in love with the woman, it's from sexist time, right? Because of who she is or what she says or whatever. Again, I should look it up. But he says, he falls in love with her because she has a certain way of scratching her head. And when I first read that quote to my wife, she said, that's exactly right. I don't know exactly what it is about you. And I said, it's the same for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly. There are plenty of other women who I think are wonderful, attractive, smart, funny, whatever it is, but I don't feel for them what I feel for you. And that's gut. Now, the awesome thing about all of this, the icing on the cake, was I sit down and try to put together a work of visual art, or when I'm working on my novel, I get to do that over and over again.
Yeah.
Oh, she just pulled a fish out of the water. What color is the fish? I don't know. Maybe it's yellow gold. Oh, my gut likes that. And in fact, I'll go back and change those things. I'm sure you do the same thing in your own writing. You go, oh, that sounds great. My gut tells me. My gut is not reliable, but my gut is really good.
Yeah.
It's not consistent, but it often achieves a tremendous amount. So one thing I'll say to my creative writing students all the time is, look, trust your gut, trust your gut, trust your gut. Am I telling you that this is going to solve all your problems? No. Trusting your gut is going to not only not solve your problems, it's going to cause you other problems because your gut is not 100% correct, but it is the best thing you have. And in the end, it can do more than anything else can in your writing. If you got to learn your other stuff through hard work,
sure,
your technique, your structure, all that kind of stuff. But it's like this beautiful little fire that's at the heart of every artistic enterprise that can't be extinguished and can't be lit, which is the same thing I see in myself. There's something in me that can't be, it could be extinguished in death, but I mean, it can't be extinguished while I'm alive. I can't make it happen. I can't light that fire. I can't create myself. I see the same thing in my wife, and seeing that, maybe it's those two things that somehow, whatever that is, that somehow see each other and burn together or something like that. But
yeah. And as I'm listening to you, what I'm thinking is that, like, I think that's where that creative spark really ignites for us. It's not between our ears. I mean, it can be, the question that kind of captivates you,
right,
or whatever, but that's not what pulls you to do something with it.
No.
It comes from a very different place.
I'm going to quote you on that. It doesn't happen between our ears. I think that's exactly right. So I'll give you an example. I don't know if you do this kind of thing, but I keep these. So if I have a book idea, I'll keep a folder, a file folder. Some of mine are hard copy and some are computer digital. So I have one, and it's getting big. I mean, it's probably this much of a file drawer, so we're talking about this much. The basic idea is about spirals and vortices. I haven't gotten any from that. I may have a plot. I may not. I may have some plots for some individuals. Maybe it's a short story collection. Maybe it's a novel. Is it science fiction? Is it straight realist fiction? I have no idea. But one thing keeps me filling it up: spirals, vortices. oh my God, I don't know what this is. I mean, it doesn't make any damn sense, really. It is. This is, I love what you said. This did not happen between my ears.
Yeah.
There's something about that image that just, and again, the likelihood is that, I mean, I'm getting old now. The likelihood is I will never write a book about that. I can't write a book about it until the things that do happen between my ears happen. Like, oh, this could be a character. This could be a conflict. Right. Or maybe it's a series of essays and it's not even fiction, whatever it is, the structure, whatever that comes to it.
Right.
But I can't leave the idea alone. I cannot. So I'm constantly throwing in every newspaper article I see about tornadoes, everything I see about any kind of math that's about spirals. You know,
that's so cool.
I'm trusting my gut.
Yeah.
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 And the thing is, what has happened is I've had ideas before that were vague and diffuse like that. And then the structure thing did come. And then I'm ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Then it suddenly makes sense.
And there's a place for whatever that pull is. There's a place for that to be unloaded or whatever.
Right.
Do you keep folders for writing projects? Do you do that kind of thing? Or do you?
I have a terrible habit of doing the thing that I know you shouldn't do, which is thinking, oh, that's a really good idea. I'll remember it. And then not writing it down.
No.
And then, 2 weeks later going, I had that really good idea. Now, what was it?
Hey.
So, yeah.
I'll tell you what.
One day I will learn. Yeah. Now that the phone is more.
Use the phone, man.
Prevalent.
It saved my ass many times.
Yeah.
Of course, the problem now is I've got too much on my phone. I have to transcribe it. I've got a ton of stuff on there. But that's a good problem to have. I don't mind that.
Yeah. I mean, I started a Substack, which is kind of fascinating to me how many people do not know what Substack is.
I kind of still don't know. Say it, please. Yeah.
It is a platform for newsletters, but it's not just like, a newsletter sending service. It has a community built in and a feature called Notes that's sort of Twitter-ish, where people can share things and have conversations and stuff like that, which I did not know when I signed up for it. I just knew everybody's using Substack, and I feel like I want a place to encourage myself to do more writing and play with it and just experiment. So I set up a Substack, and I thought, I don't know if anybody's going to want to read any of this, but whatever.
You're putting it out there. Yeah.
More people seem to want to read it than I would have expected. And so far, and I haven't decided if this is a good thing or a bad thing, I have kept with, I post something every Monday. I was not sure if I wanted to do a structure at first or not, but so far it seems to be working. And then I post about the podcast on Wednesdays and see where stuff goes. But it is not, they kind of try to preach you the gospel of like, pick your niche and tell people this is what you're going to write about and this is how often and this is what they should expect. And I was like, look, this is an experiment. I couldn't tell you what I'm going to write about from one week to the next. The first week I did it, I wrote the first post, I put something out about the podcast, and then Sinead O'Connor died and I wrote a poem and I posted it, 2 days later. Cause I was like, here it is. There you go. But I do have in the notes on my phone, like working drafts for that, things that have popped up that I want to play with for that.
Good.
So there are things that are, every once in a while I'll look and I'm like, oh, that one, I'll play with that one today, but that has been kind of an interesting experiment. And I make sure that I always call it experimental because about a month ago, I had an accident where I fell and literally landed right on my face and had a lovely black eye.
I'm sorry.
And I posted about it because, among other things, a friend had challenged me not to tell the same story twice about how I got it. And so I posted a couple.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I was like, oh, sure. You're not the one who has to come up with something every time. Easy for you to say.
Right.
But then somebody that I was talking to for the podcast just last week was like, you should totally write the story for all of those things. And I was like, I don't know if I'm writing all of them, but I'm willing to try one. So this past week, when I kind of halfway gave myself the week off because it's my birthday this week, so I've been on vacation.
Good for you. Happy birthday.
Thank you. But I put them back up and I said, okay, help me decide, you guys vote. And the one that gets the most votes is the one that I will play with. So yeah, I mean, there's no way that I could anticipate that and put it into a neat little niche for people to, no, this is completely experimental. It will probably be something completely ridiculous because as it stands right now, the top vote getter is that my Borg implant didn't go well. So,
well, you've got a built-in audience for that one.
Who knows where that's going to go? It could be totally serious. It could end up, it's the Borg. It could end up being creepy. I really don't know.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's just totally an experiment, but it's been a really fun place to just throw things out there and also meet other writers. So I recommend it to people who want a place to write and to encourage themselves to do more writing because there's a place to put it. Substack is a pretty cool place. So,
well, and again, this is all trusting your gut and play, right?
The impulse to do that is one of those things that I was looking from between my ears going, what is this about? Because I couldn't explain it. It was just there and it wanted to be done.
It wanted to be done.
And I was looking at different platforms and looking at different things. And finally I was like, look, just do Substack. Everybody's doing Substack. If you hate it, you could move it. Just do it. Just you need to do it. And I think I set the whole thing up in less than a week because it wanted to be done. I don't know why, but it did. So I did it.
That fits with our idea about play and about one thing that does, and I mean, we reference this a little bit, but one thing that does stand in the way of a lot of people, grown-ups, and play is that you do have to take that step, right? That whole thing about taking that step, and people say, get it out there, take a risk, dance like nobody's watching. I mean, I love that whole basic idea. And it also, like you said, okay, so I write something that doesn't work. This is another thing I'll tell my students all the time. Because of the nature of your gut, follow your gut. You're going to get all kinds of crap. Just write new stuff, right? Yeah. This is how you get there. It's constant. I mean, nobody thinks that's odd in sports, that your coach is going to put you in scrimmage day after day, week after week after week before the season starts, because that's how you start developing this stuff. You get into the flow that way. Yeah. Right. And I think it's great that you would also just, the one thing that the digital world adds to that is it has this public exposure. And again, the thing about, there's an advantage to writing for myself alone because I don't have to take any, I can be in creative control, but you are having this collaborative moment with people and meeting other writers. So again, it's a harder step to take because it's more public, but it's also more collaborative and more communal.
And I know at least one person who's writing his new book on Substack because he wants the feedback on it.
There you go. Oh, I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, the other thing that it's showing is like, you don't know, your impression of the thing that you wrote is only your impression. You have no idea how it's going to land. And I've put a couple of poems in there, and one from a couple of weeks ago, I kind of looked at it and I was like, yeah, I really don't know if this is baked. I have no idea, but it's Sunday night at 8:00. So out it goes tomorrow, And the next day I got an email from a friend of mine. She was like, oh, your poem was so beautiful. And I was like, okay, I guess it was baked. What do I know?
No, that's a really good point. And that is funny because when you think of it, you're not only trusting your gut, you're trusting a lot of other people's guts. And I mean, it's a different thing because you never know, like you say, what the responses are going to be. But one of probably the single best thing I ever learned about writing came from Peter Elbow, who's a writing guru, big back in the 70s. I still think a lot of people don't. What he emphasized to me was what I realized was the essence of craft. And the essence of craft is figure out how the words you choose, figure out what effect they're going to have on other people reading them. I never did that for years. I mean, that doesn't mean I wasn't paying attention to it, somewhere deep back in my head. I want to write a good story. And if I said this, I thought that was good. But he really opened it up for me. And it took me a long time to get that sense, which is when you put it out there and it starts becoming an interaction, that's where craft happens. Craft does not, I mean, my idea before was craft happens in here. And his point, he didn't say it in these words, but I'm saying craft happens here. Craft is it's a basically transactional thing. In fact, my wife influenced me a lot of that because she was reading, I don't know, Louise Rosenblatt or somebody. It was transactional theory of literature. I don't know all the details of that, but she kept emphasizing this, and she's a reading specialist. So my wife is. So she had all this experience with how actual readers read far more than I ever had.
Oh,
Because a teacher
wow.
can get up in front of the room, and just spew stuff out. And your
Right.
kids write stuff back, but you don't necessarily know how they're hearing what you're saying and all that stuff. A lot of teachers just like, well, did they give me A, B, and C? Because that's what I'm asked for. And I'm like, that's not a transaction. That's what going up to McDonald's and ordering something from the window, that you just
Yeah.
get one thing out. And my wife would talk about all the incredible, think of all the complexities. You're sitting there with a classroom, say 25 fifth graders. The complexities of what they're bringing to their transactions with language are huge. How much more is
Absolutely.
that true about adults who
Mm,
have much more experience? Now, as a writer, I can't control all of that.
right.
And of course, I would say some of you are going to get it wrong. I didn't intend it that way. Maybe I wasn't clear, or maybe I was clear and you just missed it. But I'm not going to get into judging all that stuff. The point is, I've got to think about how those people are reacting. So I salute you for putting those things out there and getting that response. For some reason, that doesn't feel. I feel like I want to wait
Hmm.
till the book comes out, and I don't know. That's what my gut's telling me. Could be wrong, could be right. It'd be very interesting to write a book like your friend or whoever you were just talking about, where your entire book is done like a focus group, where you're putting it out there and people are responding to. I mean, in that case, it's multiple authors in a way.
In a way. But
Yeah,
his is a nonfiction book. But I did talk to a guy last year, I think, who, and I'm trying to remember his name off the top of my head. It started with a V. I think it was Vince, but I can't remember his last name. And he wrote his book as a podcast. He released every chapter as an episode,
interesting.
and then he took that feedback and incorporated it. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting way to do it. You know,
And essentially, that's no different from Dickens,
right?
serializing all his stuff. And of course, he must have heard. I mean, people wrote him letters all the time.
Yeah,
Conan Doyle, people were always like demanding more Sherlock Holmes and stuff. That's so it's not as new as it may seem, even though the scale of it, the degree of it,
right.
is very new. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think you're totally right to listen to your gut.
Well, and that's the thing. Right now, I feel that way. But what you're planting in my head, which I think is really interesting, is to someday do something in that format where there's that tremendous level of constant collaboration. Obviously, the writer would still be the one making the decisions, but people, I mean, if you, again, we talked about this earlier, like a teacher or a parent, if the writer in that circumstance created an environment where people could feel really free to be creative, God only knows what they could come up
Oh
with
yeah.
and how that book might twist and turn, or how that story might twist and turn. That's really interesting to think about.
Yeah. It's
Huh.
it's interesting to watch this process because there's a whole chapter that he completely rewrote based
A
on
whole
on
chapter.
everybody's feedback
Yeah.
because the questions that we asked and the way that we reacted to it, and he was like, because I think I was somebody who said, I feel like there's a story here that's missing, like that there's some kind of
Um,
context piece that
um,
goes with this more theoretical thing that you're talking about that's really interesting.
interesting.
But I
Yeah.
think that because the person in question is Kelly Flanagan. He's been on the show twice and he's great. And so he's a therapist, but he's also started writing fictions. But this is more one of his
Okay.
therapy-ish books. And
Right.
and so, he kind of started thinking about it. He's like, I see what you mean, and I'm going to think about this. And when he posted the new version, it was like, oh yeah, oh yeah, this is exactly right.
He
This is
felt it.
exactly what you needed. Yeah. And I think it was just enough to jog him, and he knew exactly what he needed to do, which is the other interesting thing about feedback, right? Because, I think Neil Gaiman has said, like, when you get feedback on your writing, the things that people are telling you don't work are almost always correct, but the ways that they'll tell you to fix them are almost always
Right.
wrong.
Right. Right.
And so,
Right.
I don't think any of us were sitting there going, you should do this and you should do that. It was more
No,
like
no, yeah.
there's a thing here, that's a little disjointed, that's not quite
That
clicking. And he just knew exactly what to do with it, and the result was beautiful.
That's a critical point, and that, by the way, just dovetails perfectly into what Peter Elbow says, into what Peter Elbow said. Um, One of his points that I emphasize with my students is when you're in critique group, getting feedback from everybody, we have a few rules. The first rule is that the writer never defends himself or herself, ever. The second one is that the critiquers, they can say anything they want, but they are never going to find out what the writer's final decision is. I mean, they could ask me or they could ask the writer, but we don't set that up in class because I want that writer to have the absolute freedom to take or not take. And I always tell the writers, wait at least 48 hours before you make any decisions.
Ooh.
Listen to everybody as if everything they're saying is right. Accept it all as true, even if you hate it. 48 hours, trust your gut. Because by that time, you'll be past a bunch of this stuff, especially getting past that defensiveness that has been a normal part of lots of critique groups, which has ruined a lot of people for writing, in my opinion. Yeah. And then you can just say, you know what, I'm the boss, and here's what I'm going to go with. And that to me seems to maximize the positive. But I love that this. I mean, when you think of it too, that process isn't completely brand new, because what I'm saying is, for me right now, I'm going to wait and let an editor do that for me.
Right.
Now, the question then becomes, how are editors as opposed to readers? And the answer is, well, of course, editors are experts, so they have this advantage. But the disadvantage of being an editor is you're one person.
Yeah.
And the advantage of readers is that you're getting this response from all kinds of people who are by the way, your ultimate goal is them. They are where you're headed. So there's a good and a bad side to both of those things. And it makes me think of the way popular music is going right now, despite the horrible problem of theft and musicians not getting the revenue that they deserve and all the rest of it. One of the great things that's happening is we're getting all kinds of music that comes out independently.
Right.
People don't have to sign with labels anymore. And of course, just like in the world of independent publishing in the book world, of course that produces a ton of, a scale, crap, mediocre, a little better than mediocre, whatever. Of course it does that. I mean, my own work, crap, mediocre, I run the same range too, no question about it. But it does mean that people can get out with 100% creative control. Most of the time, 100% creative control for artists is not going to produce good art. Some of the times it's going to produce really good art, and art that we wouldn't have if we're under the, like, editors say all, labels say all, that kind of control by them, which of course, and the other thing with them is those things also inevitably have to be driven, at least to some degree, by market considerations.
Right.
Which aren't necessarily bad. I'm not against marketing, but people will come up with things that are incredible hits. Whoever, I mean, probably it's because of the Barbie movie, but whoever thought Oppenheimer would make $1 billion? I'm sure when they were putting that movie together, nobody thought that this book about this professor was going to make $1 billion. Well, guess what? It's beautifully done. It's on a critical theme. I mean, again, this is everything you and I have said for probably the last 10 minutes here has been about, what do we want to say? Not the dominance, the power of the gut. The power of the gut, which is a stand-in for human intuitive imagination.
Yeah.
When you put it that way, it sounds a lot more, doesn't sound fancy. Oh no, I'm not using my gut. I'm using my human intuitive imagination. Well, it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And it doesn't get anywhere near enough credit.
No, it doesn't. And it's hard to credit. I mean, what is it?
Yeah. Yeah. What exactly is it? We don't know. We just know it works.
We don't know. We just know it works. It's just like love. I don't really know what love is.
It's that
I know
it's mystery.
And I'll base my whole life on it in a heartbeat, even though it's a mystery. And it's like, God, I'm starting to feel very cozy with the mystery in that sense. I'm starting to feel familiar. It is, I mean, this mystery can be, I mean, look at love. People say it can disappear overnight. It's not under control. It's not predictable. It has its terrible side. And this is true about, nature itself. We 65 million years ago, an asteroid plowed into this planet. If it happened today, well, maybe today we could fend it off with all these new things we got going. But I mean, I love nature. Nature is my mother. My mother could reach down and snap my neck. And yet my mother also gives. And my life depends on that mother and what she gives. And I'm like, that's good. I'm balanced. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful. That means I got to take all of it together. But
yeah,
well,
I know.
now I feel like I need to jump up and say, "Can I get a witness? Get the organ, start playing." All right, everybody. Pat, we're passing the what do you call that thing? The contribution basket. What do they call
plate.
that thing?
Passing the plate.
Yeah, passing the plate. We're passing the plate, right? Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure, because we haven't really talked a whole lot about all of the specific things that you do, and you do so many of them. I want to make sure that we get some of that in here, though we have been at this for a while. So I also want to make sure that you have time.
I do have time.
Okay, great.
I very much appreciate that question. As I often say, I am a monogamist in life and a polygamist in art. And I realized years and years ago that this is impractical to the point of stupidity for a freelance artist, right? I mean, I see myself as a generalist in a specialist world. And I think there are things to be said, pro and con, for being a generalist and pro and con for being a specialist. But I'm definitely out of the norm now, the way things go. The smart thing for me to do would have been to stick with one genre of art and just develop it. Particularly for me, because my wife and I really believe in gender equality in marriage, and we really believe in parenting. And I was a K-12 teacher for years. I was a K-12 teacher for 14 years, middle school and high school. And I've been teaching at college level ever since. And by the way, when I was a K-12 teacher, 10 of those years I was a coach. My God, the schedule. I've got kids at home. I have a family, a wife and kids, and I'm a teacher, which is a job that never ends. There is no time clock. If you're a teacher, you pray for a time clock because you'll never get one. And then I'm coaching and you're traveling and all this. So I just got done as much as I could. So if I had any sense at all, I would have said, okay, pick one thing and focus on it. But I couldn't do it. Music came early and I can't stay away from it. I absolutely can't. Storytelling was a huge thing for me too. And I do work as an oral storyteller, although I haven't had much work lately, pandemic and all that stuff. And then visual art, I thought I'd actually conquered visual art because I kept it on the back burner so much that I would never. I remember one time I was working out. I was running around a college field all by myself, and I stopped in this place next to a big building, and there's a little bit of cement there, like at a doorway, and I was doing push-ups and stuff. And I noticed these little flecks of black rubber and this like blue-green glass and something else. And next thing I knew, I was sitting there arranging them in little patterns. I was like, oh, I'll put this there. I was like, what are you doing? There's nobody around. And I was like, and then I realized it was that itch. It was that visual art itch that I couldn't scratch. And that's come back really strong lately. And of course, what happened there is once I got one of these, suddenly there were all these possibilities there that I haven't done. That I didn't have before.
He's holding up his phone.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I keep doing that. I keep forgetting there's a podcast, and I'm doing the thumbs up things. Anyway, that's the thumbs up sound or whatever. Thank you. So I do too many things, but I have two responses to the massively stupid impracticality of this. One is that, like I told you, I'm the oldest of 11 kids, and 11 kids is too many kids.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it creates problems. And we would talk about this sometime, my siblings and I, and we'd go, yeah, it's too many kids, mom and dad were overworked, all this, and then we look around and we go, but who could we leave out? There was no, I mean, the conversation always ended right there because there's nobody we want to leave out. So I look at these things and I go, like, you have 4 major careers and you have a full-time job. What are you doing? Well, which can I leave out? I left out everything I could possibly. In fact, there are some things I am leaving out of my life that I'm not going to do. I just won't have time. But the other thing is just the joy of it. I mean, not only the joy of what each art form is in itself, but the joy of turning from one to another. I mean, for me, inspiration is actually never a problem, and I rarely make absolute generalizations like that. But I write and write and write and write, and if I start getting, you get that little burned feeling, you start feeling a little thin or whatever. It's like, go do some songwriting. It's like, I haven't done this for a long time. I can't wait to get into it. You're working hard on that. You get a little burned out, whatever. It's like, let's put together some of these images and see what we come up with. Oh, I've been waiting so long to get to these things. So it's just like this carousel of joy and anticipation that
Yeah.
happens over and over again. And of course, they inform each other a lot. So one of the things that's happening now, and one of the things I hope to do during this, I'm actually on sabbatical, so I have a year to work on these things, is to take some poetry and put it with some visual art and put them together and make a book where I combine those things, which has been done many times before. But so there's this constant intersection of these things. Do you write and do something else? Your brother does music. Does he write? Do you
He does
guys take
not
this
write.
approach? Okay.
He
But like you said,
draws,
he's
but he's an
architecture. Yeah.
architect. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are his two big things, but he also does photography. He used to do, like in high school, he did more, painting in art classes and things like that. I
So
don't think
he's
he's done that
doing
for
what
a
I'm
long
doing.
time, but he still does a lot of photography along with the architecture
Yeah.
and the music. Yeah.
So he's a multiple as opposed to a singular. And
Yeah.
again, pros and cons for both sides. Some of the greatest work in the world is done by people who
Mm-hmm.
focus on a single thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting. It's interesting to see how they come together. And like what you were saying, how they inform each other. And I find myself wondering, because I notice this when I've not done something for a while, and it's not necessarily something creative. I mean, when I jump in a
Yeah.
pool for the first time in a while
Right.
and start to swim laps, I have the same feeling, which is, wow, I forgot how good this feels.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Um, part of my approach too is like I often say I was not at all precocious, but I am prolific. It
Mm-hmm.
took me a long time to find my way to art, and it took me a long time to get better. I was terrible for a long time. And in fact, with my visual art recently, a bunch of my visual art that I started doing, which is during the pandemic, by the way, because I had some time, stuff that I thought was wonderful. And I'm looking back now and I'm going, Tim, oh my God, that is terrible, or at best mediocre. And this is one of the reasons I'm really sympathetic with my students, because this is a natural part. And I've learned now, because I'm old enough, I'm like, I don't get bent out of shape now when I produce crap. I'm like, oh yeah, that didn't work. Let's move on to the next thing. But that whole the prolific part, by the way, to describe myself as prolific, I don't mean that as a self-compliment. There are people who are mentally ill who are prolific writers. They fill notebooks up with gibberish. Being prolific doesn't mean anything having to do with quality. But I like the way, so I grew up in Colorado Springs and Denver, mostly Colorado Springs. We have cottonwoods in the Midwest. Do you guys have cottonwoods in New Jersey?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, they like when June comes, they start putting out seeds, and it's like snow, because there's these really soft little cottony things, filaments, and they float. And if you get a big cottonwood tree, it looks like it's snowing in June, right? And of course, like a lot of things in nature, they're going to put out probably thousands. Maybe a big cottonwood tree puts out millions. Well, how many of them are going to turn into trees?
Yeah.
Not very many. They're going to be eaten. They're going to fall in the rocks. It's like the New Testament parable of the sower and the seed. And that's kind of my approach. And I've found, so for example, with my visual art lately, I do it whenever I can. It's definitely on the back burner because I'm working on this musical and work on this novel. And those are taking the priority for sure. But I look at all the stuff I've done, and that's not very good. Oh, no, that didn't. Oh, I thought that was good, whatever. Oh, wait, I like that one. That one worked. And now I've got a lot of those that I really like. Now, of course, of that 100%, other people aren't going to like them as much as I like them. I made them, right? So it's going to go down again. Like the cottonwood tree, every time the seeds go out, a certain percentage just falls to the wayside and dies. But if I end up with a new cottonwood tree, then I feel good about that. So I have that approach. I'm just way too much of a generalist in all areas. It's like multiple genres. Like even as a writer, I write in 20 different genres of writing. There's all that. And then there's this just produce work and see what happens and see how that goes. So that's how I go.
That's not a bad thing, though. I mean, you're reminding me
it's a wonderful
of
thing. It just worries me.
That study where, they sent students out and said, I want you to take 10 really good photos. And that batch went out to deliberately try to take the best photos they could. And they told the other group, just go take as many photos as you can. And, the quantity of really good photos came from the ones who produced more stuff, not the ones who deliberately sat out to take the best things they could possibly take.
You could not
Yeah.
have said anything more designed to make me happy than that. I, honest to God, because this is something I worry about, and I'm getting old. I mean, now I feel like I'm in a race with death because I have all these big projects I want to complete. But that makes me feel better because that makes me think, okay, I'm actually doing better even with this pace, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing. That has really powerful implications.
I'm going to try to, I know I read about it somewhere. I'll see if I can find the link and
If you
I'll,
can find it, yeah, send it to me.
yeah.
Don't worry if you can't.
And if I
Because by the
find it,
way,
I'll throw it in the show notes too for everybody who's
okay,
listening.
perfect. Yeah, yeah. No, that just sounds very, very interesting. By the way, I have to say, that's a very play way of approaching it.
Right?
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 Just go play.
Just go
go
play.
Yeah.
Just go have fun taking pictures.
Yeah.
And that it makes perfect sense to me that that's how it works. Because you're not overthinking it.
No, you're right. But that was counterintuitive to me until you told me that.
Yeah.
And overthinking is a problem. Overthinking can easily be a problem for writers. And again, what I'm doing too is overthinking a life choice I made, which I made long ago, which I'm obviously not going to pull back on. So why even think about it? It's like, just eat better so you can live longer. That's what I need to do instead of overthinking.
Well, and that may also be the beauty of something like Substack. If you're going to put something out every week, you can only chew on it for so long. And I mean, I have things sitting in my notes that have been in there for weeks and weeks, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm working on it every day. It's, like I said, today I feel like that one's pulling at me, so I'm going to look at this one, but and other things I just suddenly, I may have thought that I was going to publish this piece next week, but now I realize, nope, I need to write about this and I need to write about it now. And that's what's going out on Monday. And there goes my weekend, but you don't really have that opportunity to sit and chew on it until it's half dead. And so it may not be perfect when it goes, but it goes.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's that play approach. There's a great deal of freedom in that. And there's a great deal of actually reflecting immediate life experience as you live it. Yeah. And that's, obviously too, this is a big part of what social media is that it can be very, very immediate for good and ill. Right. Obviously, it creates its problems, but then there's that other dynamic side to it. And I love thinking about the dynamic side of all this because obviously there's so many bad things, bad effects happening with tech right now that need to be addressed. And I think they're being addressed, but I mean, it's like, again, I live in Silicon Valley. 10 years from now, the big tech companies could do no wrong. 10 years ago, I mean.
Right.
Right now, they can do no right. Again, there's a balance in there somewhere, and I'm not saying it's like 50-50 because they are having some really big problems and some bad effects, but again, that immediacy is a very powerful thing, a powerful part. Democratic immediacy is a huge, powerful part of the tech revolution.
Yeah. It's interesting, but I feel like it also is like, say today you don't feel like you're producing any work that is worth reading, seeing, hearing, whatever. Could be the same thing 10 years from now.
Absolutely.
Be in a completely different place.
Absolutely right.
And the only way you get there is by not giving up.
That's exactly right. And again, it's funny to think that Go Play is both a liberation and like not an admonishment, but it's like, get off your ass and go play. You know what I mean? It's do it. It's the doing, but it's fun. So go out there and have that fun, but don't just sit around thinking about having fun. Go actually mess around with this stuff.
And isn't that interesting too? Because I think we think about doing things now more than we actually do them. And I wonder how much of that is because so much of life seems to happen on a screen now. We've forgotten that life is a thing that happens in a world with trees and grass and markers and paper and, refrigerators and whatever, all of other people, all of this stuff is where life actually happens. It's not on the screen.
I'm a member of the TV generation. In fact, I was born in 53, which was the year I have found out since that television blew up over the country, everywhere. We started that. Of course, people were glued to their radios before that.
Mm-hmm.
And people have always been looking for these forms of communication. So I'm not a Luddite about them, but I think you're absolutely right. I really worry about phone bots, and my wife particularly and I agree with her, really worries about phone behavior with kids, especially young kids, parentally and adult. Not inculcated, but adults are enabling this behavior, giving kids phones when they're sitting at family sitting at a restaurant, and they throw the kid a phone to keep the kid. It's like, you have a moment to bond as a family. You could be talking to each other, you could be telling stories, you could be joking, and you throwing a phone at that kid. In that moment, I'm not against the phone, I'm against the misuse of the phone.
Yes.
Yeah. So again, that's a problem. And yet, there we go. There's the digital tech dilemma. My phone has allowed me unbelievable creativity, efficiency, safety with my family, all these things that it does it's just unbelievable. So again, it's the freedom responsibility balance that we always have to come back to.
It's always the balance. Always the balance.
Well, it has been wonderful talking to you. I knew this was going to be super fun, and I was not wrong.
Me too, and I suspected that we would go long, and I wasn't wrong either.
And listen, when you're talking to me, it goes long. It's kind of a pub tendency I have, whatever.
But it's been a great conversation, and I'm so glad that you came and spent some time with me today. I really appreciate it. That is this week's show. Thanks so much to Tim Myers for joining me and to you for listening. Please leave a review for this episode. There is a link right in your podcast app, and in it, tell us how play influences your creative process. If you enjoyed our conversation, I hope you'll share it with a friend. Thank you so much. If this episode resonated with you, or if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, join me at The Spark on Substack as we form a community that supports and celebrates each other's creative courage. It's free, and it's also where I'll be adding programs for subscribers and listeners. The link is in your podcast app, so sign up today. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners.